Every morning at sunrise, the old dog dug in the exact same spot, rain or shine, summer or winter. For nearly 3 months, nobody could stop him. The dog was 12 years old, nearly deaf, and moved slowly because of arthritis. Yet the moment dawn arrived, he would limp down to the shoreline of Lake Michigan, walk to a narrow stretch of sand near an abandoned pier, and begin digging furiously. Then he would sit and wait, sometimes for hours. The behavior puzzled everyone in the small lakeside town of Harbor Point, Michigan, especially Caleb Turner. The 46-year-old former Navy SEAL had moved there 6 months earlier, hoping to leave his past behind. After years of combat deployments and the loss of several teammates overseas, Caleb wanted only 2 things: silence and solitude. Instead, every morning from his cabin window, he watched his elderly neighbor's German Shepherd repeat the same strange ritual: die, wait, stare at the water, dig again. At first, Caleb ignored it. Then, one morning, the dog uncovered something, a rusted metal bracelet. The following day, he uncovered a child's shoe. 3 days later, he dug up a waterproof flashlight that looked far too modern to have been buried for long. That was the moment Caleb stopped believing it was random. The dog wasn't digging because he was confused. He was searching, and judging by the things he kept finding, whatever he was looking for had something to do with the lake. Within weeks, Caleb would uncover a decades-old disappearance, a secret buried beneath the shoreline of Lake Michigan, and the reason an aging German Shepherd refused to stop searching, even after everyone else had given up hope. Caleb Turner came to Harbor Point because he wanted to disappear. The former Navy SEAL had spent more than 20 years serving his country, much of that time in places most Americans would never see. He had survived combat, lost friends, and carried memories he rarely discussed. By the time he retired, he was exhausted, not physically, emotionally. The small town on the eastern shore of Lake Michigan seemed like the perfect place to start over. His cabin sat near the water, far enough from town to provide privacy but close enough for basic necessities. Most days passed quietly. Caleb fished, repaired old furniture, took long walks along the shoreline. He spoke to few people, exactly the way he preferred it. Then he noticed the dog. The German Shepherd belonged to his nearest neighbor, 74-year-old Walter Grayson. The old man had lived beside the lake for nearly 40 years and rarely left his property. His dog, Duke, was almost as old by canine standards. Gray fur covered much of his muzzle. Arthritis stiffened his movements. One ear no longer stood upright. Yet every morning before sunrise, Duke followed the same routine. He walked down to the abandoned pier several hundred yards from Walter's house. He dug furiously in the sand for 15 or 20 minutes. Then he sat facing the lake, waiting. Caleb watched the ritual for weeks. At first, he dismissed it as a harmless habit. Old dogs develop strange routines. There was nothing unusual about that. Then Duke started finding things. The first discovery happened during a cold October morning. Caleb was fishing nearby when the dog uncovered a rusted bracelet. Walter simply pocketed it and led Duke home. 2 days later, the dog dug up a faded child's sneaker buried beneath wet sand. A week later, he found a waterproof flashlight. Unlike the bracelet and shoe, the flashlight looked relatively new. That detail bothered Caleb. He's been doing this for years, Walter explained one afternoon when Caleb finally asked about it. Digging? Walter nodded. Ever since the accident. Caleb frowned. What accident? The old man immediately looked away. Long story. Then he changed the subject. The reaction only increased Caleb's curiosity. Over the following days, he paid closer attention. Duke always searched the same area. Never farther than 30 feet from the old pier, never anywhere else. More importantly, the dog seemed convinced something remained hidden beneath the shoreline. One morning, Caleb decided to follow him. The sun had barely risen when Duke reached the usual spot. Caleb stood several yards away watching. The German Shepherd sniffed the sand carefully before beginning another excavation. His movements were slow but determined. After several minutes, Duke suddenly froze. His ears lifted. Then he started digging faster than Caleb had ever seen. Sand flew in every direction. Caleb moved closer. What is it, boy? Duke ignored him. Seconds later, the dog uncovered something metallic. Caleb knelt and carefully pulled the object free. It was a small stainless steel container about the size of a lunchbox. The lid was sealed tightly. Walter arrived moments later. The instant he saw the container, all color drained from his face. No, he whispered. Caleb looked up. You know what this is? Walter stared at the box. His hands trembled. That's impossible. Caleb stood. Walter. The old man's eyes never left the container. It should still be in the lake. Silence settled over the shoreline. Waves rolled gently against the abandoned pier. Duke sat beside the hole he had dug, staring at the metal box as though he recognized it. Caleb felt the familiar instinct that had served him throughout his military career. Something important had just happened. "Tell me what's going on," he said quietly. Walter closed his eyes. For several long seconds, he said nothing. Then he looked toward Lake Michigan. 27 years ago, he said, a little girl disappeared right here. Galeb Froze. Walter pointed toward the water. And that box belonged to her. The wind suddenly felt colder. Duke lowered himself beside the shoreline and stared out across the lake once again, waiting, just as he had every morning for years, as though somewhere beyond the water, the answer he had been searching for was finally beginning to come back. Caleb Turner carried the stainless steel container back to Walter Grayson's house, while Duke followed closely behind. The old German shepherd seemed unusually alert despite his age. His tired eyes never left the box. Inside the cabin, Walter sat heavily at the kitchen table and stared at the container for several minutes before speaking. Her name was Emma Parker, he finally said. She was 8 years old. Caleb remained silent. Years in the military had taught him that people often needed time before telling painful stories. Walter looked toward a framed photograph hanging on the wall. A smiling little girl stood beside a younger Duke on the shoreline near the very pier where the dog searched every morning. Caleb immediately understood why the old dog refused to stop digging. "She was your granddaughter?" Walter nodded. "The only grandchild I ever had." His voice cracked slightly. "Duke grew up with her." Walter slowly opened a drawer and removed an old newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local Girl Missing After Storm on Lake Michigan." The article was dated 27 years earlier. Caleb scanned the faded pages. According to the report, Emma disappeared during a violent summer storm. Witnesses saw her playing near the shoreline shortly before heavy rain moved into the area. When her parents went looking for her, she was gone. Search teams spent weeks combing the lake and surrounding forests. They found nothing. No body, no evidence, no answers. Eventually, authorities concluded that Emma had likely fallen into the lake during the storm and drowned. Walter laughed bitterly. Everyone accepted that explanation except Duke. Caleb looked toward the dog. The German shepherd rested near the fireplace, but remained focused on the container. He kept searching? Walter nodded. Every day. The old man swallowed hard. For 27 years, silence filled the room. Caleb found himself struggling to comprehend the number. 27 years. Longer than many dogs even lived as a species. Yet somehow Duke had continued returning to the same shoreline. "How old is he?" Caleb asked. Walter smiled sadly. "This isn't the original Duke." Caleb frowned. "What?" Walter reached for another photograph. This one showed Emma with a younger German shepherd. "That was Duke?" Then he pointed toward the dog lying by the fireplace. "This is Duke the Fourth." Caleb started. Walter explained. The original Duke searched until the day he died. Afterward, one of his puppies inherited the name, then another, then another. Each generation grew up hearing the same story, walking the same shoreline, following the same routine. Caleb sat back in disbelief. "You've got to be kidding." Walter shook his head. "I wish I was." The old man's eyes drifted toward the dog. Every generation somehow ended up searching the same spot. Caleb looked at Duke differently now. The old German shepherd wasn't simply following a random habit. He was continuing a mission passed down across nearly 3 decades. Then Walter pointed toward the container. "Open it." Caleb carefully released the rusted latch. The seal resisted at first, before finally breaking loose. Inside rested several water-damaged items wrapped in plastic, a friendship bracelet, several photographs, a small stuffed rabbit, and a folded letter. Walter immediately recognized the rabbit. Tears filled his eyes. Emma carried that everywhere. Caleb carefully unfolded the letter. The paper was stained and fragile, but most of the writing remained readable. The first line immediately changed everything. "If someone finds this, it means I never made it back." Caleb looked up. Walter's face had gone pale. "What is it?" Caleb continued reading. The letter wasn't written by Emma. It was written by a teenage boy named Daniel Brooks. The date matched the day Emma disappeared. As the story unfolded, Caleb felt his stomach tighten. During the storm, Daniel had witnessed something nobody else saw. Emma hadn't fallen into the lake. A man had taken her. According to the letter, Daniel saw Emma arguing with an unknown adult near the abandoned pier shortly before the storm arrived. He tried to follow them but lost sight of both. When the weather worsened, frightened and unsure what to do, he hid the letter inside the waterproof container, intending to give it to police later. Then the storm intensified. Daniel never returned. Walter stared in shock. A man? Caleb nodded slowly. That's what he wrote. Why didn't he tell anyone? Caleb looked toward the final paragraph. His expression darkened. Because he disappeared that same night, silence crashed into the room. Walter looked as though someone had knocked the air from his lungs. For 27 years, everyone believed Emma drowned. Now, a forgotten letter hidden beneath the shoreline suggested something entirely different. Someone had taken her, and the only witness vanished before he could tell anyone. Duke slowly stood and walked toward the table. The old dog placed his head beside the container and stared at the letter. Caleb felt a chill run through him. The German Shepherd had spent years searching the shoreline. Generations of dogs had done the same. And somehow, after 27 years, they had finally uncovered the first real clue in Emma Parker's disappearance. But as Caleb reread the final lines of Daniel's letter, he realized the mystery was even larger than they imagined. Because beneath the signature sat one final sentence: "I know where he took her." The room remained silent after Caleb read the final sentence aloud. "I know where he took her." Walter Grayson stared at the letter as though the words might suddenly change. Duke stood beside the table, his tired eyes fixed on the faded pages. For nearly 27 years, the lake had guarded its secrets. Now, because of an old metal container buried beneath the shoreline, the first real lead had finally surfaced. Caleb carefully unfolded the remaining section of the letter. Several lines near the bottom had been damaged by water, but enough survived to reveal a location Daniel Brooks described following the man and Emma along a forest trail north of Harbor Point. He watched them disappear toward an abandoned hunting cabin, hidden deep among the pine woods overlooking the lake. Then the storm forced him to turn back. That was the last thing he ever wrote. "The cabin still exists," Walter said quietly. Caleb looked up. "You know the place?" Walter nodded slowly. "Everyone used to." The old man stared out the window toward the distant tree line. It belonged to a man named Robert Kessler. Caleb immediately noticed the tension in his voice. "Who was he?" Walter hesitated. "A local handyman. Lived alone." "Was he ever investigated?" Walter laughed bitterly. "Not seriously." The answer angered Caleb more than he expected. An 8-year-old girl disappears, and nobody investigates the last person seen with her? Nobody knew she was with him? Walter pointed at the letter. Daniel was the only witness. Silence returned. Caleb understood. Without the letter, authorities had assumed Emma drowned. The storm, the lake, the missing child, everything fit too neatly. No one looked deeper. Then Caleb noticed something else written near the bottom of the page. Walter. What? There's another name. He carefully held up the letter. Beneath Robert Kessler's name appeared a second one. Sheriff Thomas Reed. Walter's eyes widened. No. Caleb frowned. You know him? He was sheriff back then. Walter took the letter with trembling hands. He's the one who led the investigation. Neither man spoke for several seconds. The implication hung heavily between them. Then Duke suddenly barked. The old German shepherd rarely made noise anymore. Both men immediately looked toward him. The dog stood near the front door, waiting. You've got to be kidding, Walter muttered. Duke barked again. Caleb almost smiled. Looks like he wants us to go. 2 hours later, they entered the northern pine forest. Caleb drove while Walter navigated. Duke occupied the back seat. The trail leading toward the cabin had long since fallen into disuse. Branches scraped the truck. Weeds covered portions of the road. Several times, Caleb wondered whether they were even heading in the right direction. Then Walter pointed ahead. There, through the trees, stood a small structure. Time had not been kind to it. The roof sagged. Windows were broken. Vines crawled across the walls. Yet the cabin remained standing. Caleb stepped out first. The former SEAL immediately slipped into old habits. He scanned the surroundings, studied entry points, checked the terrain. Nothing seemed unusual. Then Duke raced past him. The old dog moved with surprising energy. Duke, Walter called. The German shepherd ignored him completely. He ran directly toward the rear of the cabin and disappeared behind the structure. Caleb followed. The moment he rounded the corner, he stopped. Duke was digging, furiously. The same way he had dug beside the lake, dirt flew behind him. Walter arrived seconds later. Not again. Caleb knelt beside the dog. Within moments, Duke's paw struck something solid. Wood. Caleb cleared away more dirt. A small trapdoor emerged beneath years of soil and roots. Walter stared in disbelief. I've lived here my whole life. Caleb grabbed the rusted handle and pulled. The trapdoor opened with a loud groan. Cold air rushed upward from the darkness below. A hidden cellar. Neither man spoke. Caleb switched on a flashlight. The beam revealed narrow stairs descending underground. Duke immediately started down. Absolutely not, Caleb muttered. He grabbed the dog's collar before he could disappear. Then Caleb descended first. The cellar was larger than expected. Shelves lined the walls. Most were empty. Dust covered everything. Yet one object immediately drew their attention. A metal trunk sat in the far corner. Unlike everything else, it appeared deliberately preserved. Caleb approached carefully. The lock had long since rusted away. He lifted the lid. Inside rested dozens of documents, photographs, receipts, newspaper clippings, and a leather-bound journal. Walter picked up one of the photographs. His hands began shaking instantly. Emma. Caleb looked over. The picture showed Emma Parker standing outside the cabin, alive, smiling. The photograph was dated 2 days after her supposed drowning. Neither man moved. 27 years of assumptions collapsed in a single moment. Emma had survived the day she disappeared. Then Caleb opened the journal. The first page carried Robert Kessler's name. The second page carried something even worse. Payments, names, dates, transactions. Walter felt the blood drain from his face. What is that? Caleb turned several pages. His expression darkened. It's not a diary. Then what? Caleb looked at him. It's a record. The old cabin suddenly felt much colder, because as Caleb continued reading, he realized Emma Parker wasn't the only name in the journal. There were others, several others, and every entry connected back to one person, Sheriff Thomas Reed, the man responsible for investigating Emma's disappearance, the same man whose name appeared in Daniel Brooks's final letter, and according to the journal, he had spent years making sure certain people were never found. Caleb Turner barely slept that night. The journal from the hidden cellar sat on his kitchen table while Duke rested nearby. Every few hours, the old German shepherd would lift his head and stare at the leather book as though guarding it. Caleb spent most of the night reading page after page. The deeper he went, the worse the story became. Robert Kessler had carefully documented everything. Names, dates, location, meetings, payments, favors. Several entries directly connected former Sheriff Thomas Reed to missing persons cases stretching back more than 20 years. Not all of the names were children. Some were runaways. Some were vulnerable adults. A few had never even been officially classified as missing, yet the pattern was impossible to ignore. Each time someone disappeared under suspicious circumstances, Sheriff Reed had somehow been involved in the investigation. And each time, the trail went cold. By sunrise, Caleb knew this was far beyond a local mystery. He immediately contacted the Michigan State Police. At first, investigators treated the claims cautiously. Then Caleb provided photographs of the journal, the hidden cellar, and the photograph showing Emma alive 2 days after her supposed drowning. Everything changed. Within 48 hours, a formal investigation began. Detectives descended on Harbor Point. Forensic teams examined the cabin. Historians reviewed old case files. Reporters arrived. The quiet lakeside town suddenly found itself at the center of a story nobody wanted to believe. Walter Grayson struggled more than anyone. For 27 years, he had mourned his granddaughter, believing she died in the lake. Now he knew she had survived that day, at least for a time. The discovery brought hope and heartbreak in equal measure. "Do you think she's still alive?" he asked Caleb one evening. Caleb didn't answer immediately. The truth was, he didn't know. The journal proved Emma survived the storm. It did not reveal what happened afterward. Yet something continued bothering him. If Robert Kessler recorded everything, why stop? Why leave the story unfinished? Then Duke provided another clue. 3 days after investigators seized the journal, the old German shepherd returned to the shoreline. Caleb watched him from a distance. For the first time in years, Duke did not dig. Instead, he walked slowly along the beach, before stopping near the remains of the abandoned pier. Then he sat, waiting. Caleb approached carefully. "What is it, buddy?" Duke stared toward the water. Caleb followed his gaze. At first, he saw nothing. Then he noticed a weathered wooden post protruding from the sand several yards away. The post looked insignificant. Most people would have ignored it, yet Duke remained focused on it. Caleb walked over. Carved into the wood were several initials. Most had faded long ago. One remained visible. E.P. Emma Parker. Caleb felt a chill. The post wasn't random. Someone had deliberately marked it. Then he noticed something else. Attached beneath the weathered wood sat a rusted metal ring partially buried by sand. Caleb pulled. The ring moved. Sand collapsed inward, a hidden compartment. Within minutes, investigators arrived. Together they uncovered a narrow waterproof tube concealed beneath the post. Inside rested a bundle of documents protected from the elements for decades. Walter arrived just as the tube was opened. The first item removed was a photograph. Emma Parker, older, approximately 12 years old, alive. The second item was a birth certificate under a different name. The third was a series of letters written in the same handwriting, Emma's handwriting. Walter nearly collapsed. She's alive. One detective carefully opened the first letter. Silence spread across the shoreline as he began reading. Dear Grandpa, if you're reading this, then somebody finally found the place Mr. Kessler told me to hide these. Tears immediately filled Walter's eyes. The letter explained everything. Emma had been taken by Robert Kessler. But the truth was more complicated than anyone expected. Kessler had not acted alone. Sheriff Thomas Reed had been involved from the beginning. The two men operated a long-running scheme involving forged identities, illegal adoptions, and the disappearance of vulnerable children, yet something changed after Emma arrived. According to the letters, Kessler eventually regretted his actions. Rather than turning Emma over to Reed, he secretly moved her across state lines and raised her under a new identity. He never told her the truth until she was older. Then came the most important line. If Grandpa is still alive, tell him I never stopped looking for him. Walter broke down completely. 27 years of grief, guilt, and unanswered questions crashed over him all at once. The shoreline fell silent, except for the sound of waves rolling onto the sand. Then investigators opened the final letter. It had been written only 8 years earlier. Unlike the others, it contained a current name, a current address, and a phone number. Every person on the beach froze. Caleb stared at the paper. Walter stared at it. Even the detectives seemed momentarily stunned. After nearly 3 decades, Emma Parker might not only be alive, they might finally know exactly where to find her. Duke slowly walked over and sat beside Walter. The old German shepherd rested his head against the grieving grandfather's arm. For the first time since Caleb moved to Harbor Point, the dog wasn't staring at the lake. He wasn't searching. He wasn't waiting. It was almost as if he knew the mission that began 27 years ago was finally coming to an end. The drive to Wisconsin felt longer than any journey Caleb Turner had taken in years. Walter Grayson sat beside him, clutching Emma's letters so tightly that the paper trembled in his hands. In the back seat, Duke rested quietly with his head against the window. Neither man spoke much. After 27 years of uncertainty, they were finally heading toward an answer. The address from Emma's final letter led to a small town outside Green Bay. The house itself was modest. White siding, a front porch, flower beds near the walkway. Nothing about it suggested the extraordinary story connected to it. Caleb parked across the street. Walter stared at the house for nearly a minute before speaking. What if she doesn't remember me? Caleb looked at him. She wrote those letters. Walter nodded slowly. Yeah. His voice cracked. I know. Then the front door opened. A woman stepped outside, carrying a watering can. She appeared to be in her mid-30s. Dark hair, kind eyes, ordinary in every possible way. Yet the moment Walter saw her, tears filled his eyes. Emma. The woman froze. The watering can slipped from her hands and landed in the grass. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then she whispered a single word. Grandpa? Walter broke down completely. 27 years of grief vanished in an instant. He crossed the lawn faster than Caleb thought possible for a man his age. Emma met him halfway. The reunion was messy, emotional, imperfect. Exactly the way real reunions often are. Neither could stop crying. Neither seemed capable of letting go. Caleb quietly stepped back. Some moments belong only to family. Later that afternoon, seated around Emma's kitchen table, the full story finally emerged. After taking Emma, Robert Kessler eventually became consumed by guilt. According to Emma, he spent years living in fear of Sheriff Reed. The former sheriff controlled the operation, and possessed enough influence to silence anyone who threatened him, yet Kessler could never bring himself to harm the child. Instead, he raised her as his daughter under a different identity. When Emma turned 18, he finally confessed everything. He told her who she really was. He told her about Harbor Point, about Lake Michigan, about Walter, about the life stolen from her. "Why didn't you come back?" Walter asked softly. Emma lowered her eyes. "I wanted to." Silence filled the room. "Then why didn't you?" Tears appeared. "Because by then you had already buried me." Walter's face crumpled. Emma reached across the table and took his hand. "I wasn't angry." Her voice trembled. "I was scared." The years had built walls neither of them knew how to climb. She worried that returning would only reopen wounds. She worried nobody would believe her story. She worried she might destroy what little peace remained. So instead, she wrote letters. She hid them exactly where Kessler instructed, and she hoped someone would eventually find them. Caleb glanced toward Duke lying beside the kitchen door. "Looks like somebody did." Emma followed his gaze. The moment she saw the old German shepherd, she froze. "No way." Walter smiled through tears. "What?" Emma slowly knelt beside the dog. "Duke?" The German shepherd lifted his head. Emma laughed and cried at the same time. "The original Duke used to sleep beside my bed." She gently stroked the dog's fur. "You look just like him." Walter nodded. "Fourth generation." Emma starred. "You've kept the line going?" "Every single one." The old man smiled. "They never stopped looking for you." Silence settled across the room. Even Caleb felt his throat tighten. 27 years. 4 generations of dogs. One mission. One promise. Never stop searching. The months that followed transformed Harbor Point. State investigators reopened dozens of cold cases connected to Sheriff Thomas Reed. Evidence from Kessler's journal led to multiple discoveries. Several families finally received answers they had been seeking for decades. Though not every mystery ended as happily as Emma's, many long-buried truths finally came to light. For Walter and Emma, healing took time. Lost years could never be replaced. Yet new memories slowly filled the empty spaces. Emma visited Harbor Point often. Eventually, she bought a small house overlooking the lake. Not far from her grandfather, not far from the shoreline where everything began. Then came one final sunrise. Caleb stood near the abandoned pier watching the first light spread across Lake Michigan. Beside him sat Walter, Emma, and Duke. The old German shepherd moved slower than ever now. Age had finally caught him. Yet that morning, something felt different. Duke walked to the familiar patch of sand where he had spent years digging. He looked out across the water one final time. Then he turned around and walked back. No digging, no searching, no waiting. He simply lay down beside Walter and rested his head on the old man's foot. Emma smiled. "I think he knows." Walter nodded slowly. "Yeah." His hand rested gently on the dog's neck. "I think he does too." Duke closed his eyes. The mission was over. The girl was found. The family was reunited. The truth was finally known. 4 generations of loyalty had carried one promise across nearly 3 decades. And now, at last, there was nothing left to search for. Only home. Sometimes the people who refuse to give up are not people at all. Sometimes they walk on 4 legs. Sometimes they cannot speak. Yet their loyalty carries them farther than most of us could ever imagine. For 27 years, the mystery of Emma Parker's disappearance haunted the shores of Lake Michigan. Families mourned. Questions remained unanswered. Time moved forward. People grew older. Memories faded. Most of the town eventually accepted that the truth would never be known. But Duke never accepted it. Neither did the dogs that came before him. Generation after generation, they returned to the same stretch of shoreline. They dug, they searched, they waited. Long after the headlines disappeared and the investigations ended, they continued a mission nobody had asked them to carry. Walter Grayson spent nearly 3 decades believing he had lost his granddaughter forever. Like so many families touched by tragedy, he learned how to survive without answers. Yet surviving is not the same as healing. Deep inside, part of him never stopped hoping. Hope can be painful. It can keep old wounds open. But sometimes hope is the only thing that carries people through the darkest years of their lives. Emma Parker lost an entire childhood. She lost a family, a hometown, and a future that should have been hers. Yet she never lost the desire to reconnect with the people who loved her. Even after years of fear and uncertainty, she continued leaving clues. She continued believing that someday someone would find the truth. Caleb Turner arrived in Harbor Point, hoping to escape his own past. Instead, he found a purpose he never expected. By following an old dog, he helped uncover a secret buried beneath nearly 3 decades of silence. In doing so, he discovered something many veterans understand better than most: some missions are worth finishing, no matter how long they take. The investigation brought answers to other families as well. Old cases were reopened. Forgotten victims were remembered. Long-buried secrets finally came into the light. Not every ending was happy. Not every loss could be repaired. But truth has value even when it arrives late. Sometimes knowing what happened is the first step toward peace. Yet perhaps the most remarkable part of the story remains Duke, or rather, all the Dukes who came before him. 4 generations of German Shepherds carried the same purpose from one lifetime to the next. They searched a shoreline because somewhere in their bond with the people they loved, the mission endured. Maybe it was training, maybe it was instinct, maybe it was something deeper that cannot easily be explained. Whatever the reason, they never stopped showing up. And in the end, that made all the difference. The shoreline of Lake Michigan looks much the same today as it did 27 years ago. Waves still roll against the sand. Sunrises still paint the water gold. Visitors still walk along the beach without knowing the full story hidden beneath their feet. Yet for those who do know, the place means something different now. It is no longer a symbol of loss. It is a reminder that persistence matters, loyalty matters, hope matters, because sometimes the answer is still out there. Sometimes the person you're searching for is still waiting to be found. And sometimes a faithful dog refuses to quit until the people he loves finally come home. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Have you ever known a dog whose loyalty amazed you? Have you ever experienced a reunion or second chance that changed your life? We'd love to hear your story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories about loyal dogs, veterans, family, faith, hope, and the extraordinary bonds that connect us across generations. May God bless you and your loved ones, comfort those still searching for answers, strengthen families carrying old wounds, and remind all of us that no act of love is ever truly forgotten. And may you never forget that sometimes the longest journey home begins with a single dog digging in the sand beside a lake at sunrise.